All right, welcome to the first live Nebraska Ed Chat. We've found a topic that we think that this is going to relate very well to it. My name is Josh Allen. I am the Instructional Tech Facilitator for Papillion La Vista Schools. I am President-elect of NETA and also organizer for Ed Camp Omaha. And my role tonight is to kind of manage what's going on Twitter for the hashtag NEBEdChat, and kind of bring it back to our distinguished guest. The topic for tonight is implementing an instructional model, and the people that we have gathered here tonight are way smarter about that than I am. So for most of the evening, someone else is going to be doing the talking. So let's go just from left to right. Brandon, if you want to start, introduce yourself, and then Colin, Laura down the row.
All right, I'm Brandon Moinkle, and I'm the 712 principal at Milford Junior Senior High School.
My row must be different than yours because I'm on the end on mine, but I'm Colin Morgan. I'm the high school principal at Centennial.
Mitch?
Oh, I'm next. I'm on the end too on mine. Mitch Kubicek, superintendent at Dorchester Public School.
Ryan?
Ryan Rickenbaugh, high school principal at Waverly.
Toby?
And I'm Toby Bose. I work at ESU 6. I'm the Director of Professional Development. And I get the honor of moderating this part of the chat.
And I'm Laura Kroll. I am the elementary principal at Exeter Milligan. All right.
Toby, go ahead and start with our first question for the evening.
Yeah. So the notion here is that we're going to talk about using an instructional model. And so I thought the best way to just start this out is that term could be used a lot of different ways, thrown around, but how would you define an instructional model, especially as you've done this work at your buildings, and what does that really mean, an instructional model?
Well, I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah.
The instructional model that we are implementing is Marzano, and this year marks the first year that we've had all K through 12 teachers in our district that have gone through the Marzano training, and we've kind of found a way to implement it so that it's not so overwhelming to teachers, which I know that's going to be one of the questions that are coming up. But for me, an instructional model is just the biggest thing, I guess, is a common language. It's kind of your go-to piece. When you're having conversations with teachers and you're using that same language throughout your discussions, they know what you're talking about and you know what they are talking about. So that's probably been the biggest plus to the implementation of an instructional model for us.
And, you know, when I think of an instructional model, I think it's pretty simple. It's just at our district, how do we define good teaching? You know, and like what do we name good teaching, and then developing that common language so you know it invites collaboration and dialogue about what's happening in classrooms. But you know, simply for me, I think it's simple as just what do we think good instruction is, and how do we define it.
I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead.
We're kind of in the infant stages of implementation of Marzano, and the big benefit that I see right off the bat is just that you open the door for collaboration when people can have that common language and the ability to, you know, a lot of times in teaching they can be talking about the same thing but using different language, and that hinders that collaborative effort. Now with the common language, people know what each other is talking about. It creates a better environment for teachers to be able to work together and more comfortable in talking about certain instruction strategies, but then also comfortable even being in each other's classrooms so they can have those discussions. So from a beginning standpoint, it just promotes that collaborative effort.
Colin?
Well, I would say it's a framework for instruction. We're in year 3 of implementing Marzano, and I would echo a lot of what all of you have said. Particularly this year, I've seen a lot more a lot more productive conversations when our teachers are together and discussing instruction. And I've really seen that common language really take off for us.
One thing I'll just bring in from Twitter, we've got quite a few people chiming in, and a lot of what you guys said too, kind of the common language. Otis from ESU7, it's a language that teachers speak, so they're all on one page. Jill Johnson from Toby's ESU6, comprehensive framework of effective teaching practices that results in student learning. Obviously, that we can all agree that that's kind of the main purpose of whatever model that we're choosing. So.
And Ryan, you'll be happy to know that you and your brother are on the same page because he says it's a common language of instruction.
Very good.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed is that, and I'm going to quote Phil Warwick when he was at a training. He said he talked about the Tower of Babel. That too often in education we have this Tower of Babel where we can't talk about things, we can't share ideas, and we kind of go back to the fact that an instructional model lets you name things, because we don't typically in education, I don't think we do a very good job of naming strategies and naming and having a vocabulary. So I think that's one of the big things that we've noticed from schools is, how can you have teachers collaborate and share about things if you can't even talk about it? You don't talk the same language. So I'm glad to hear those things on Twitter because I think that hits it right on the head.
Yep, absolutely. You want to go to second question, Tobe?
Okay, so as we think about this, and I think some of you have addressed it, but in the next few questions, I think a key thing is when you're looking at this instructional model, list maybe one or two benefits that you've seen, maybe direct benefits to having that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the models that you've adopted. But if you could just list one or two benefits, I think that would help the folks watching this, and I'm hoping to get some good ideas from the Twitter chat as well.
I'll start again. I think one of the biggest benefits is this is my third year as the elementary principal, and I came from the instructional coaching position, and so I loved being in the classroom, and I loved going in and kind of being that team player with the teachers. And what the implementation of this instructional model has done for me is it has given me set guidelines on things that I'm specifically looking for when I do my walkthroughs and I go into classrooms. And so when I go into classrooms, I know what I'm looking for, and teachers know what I'm looking for. So it has really helped guide me as I go through and I do my walkthroughs.
I just want to piggyback real quick on that because Toby and I just talked kind of our plan for next year, and that's exactly what I'm striving for as principal. And where I struggle the most is not comfortable or not being on the same page when you walk into a classroom knowing exactly what you're looking for, and that's exactly what the instructional model provides. So I'm striving to be where you're at, Laura.
BMO? Oh, he's muted.
I thought he could unmute himself. Colin, go ahead.
Go ahead, Colin.
Oh, okay.
Mute me back up, Josh, for a second.
Well, I'd agree with what the first two said, but I think another benefit, too, is everyone has some reluctant adopters in your building, and having that research-based instructional practices to fall back on to say, it's been proven that this will work. I think that's been a benefit with some of our folks that are maybe a little bit harder to move.
Mitch?
Well, just sitting back here listening to you guys, I think you defined it really well, the benefits, from what you said, Laura, about coaching and really getting that focus for when you're observing instruction, it really kind of gives you a nice set of guidelines of what I'm looking for in a classroom, and then also what does that conversation look like when we're talking with, you know, as educators when we're talking together, just driving that conversation, driving that dialogue about maybe defining my own strengths or areas for growth for me. That instructional model I really think helps that process, and it really is kind of a nice guideline for defining where you are instructionally and then also where you might be headed as well.
That was to piggyback off what Mitch was saying. That was one of the things that's coming out on Twitter. Also, is you know, the structure. Craig Madura mentioned that collaboration among teachers. Holly Christian mentioned we're all working towards a common goal. What was the other one I was going to hit on? Chris Arndt from out in Sydney. He says an instructional model creates focus and common language. Was, you know, one of the things that you guys mentioned as well. So.
All right, Tobe, I think we're ready for question 3.
Okay, I'm back. I'm floating in and out of reality here in connectivity. So if I go away, if you see me disappear, it's not because you people are boring me. But let's talk about, maybe we can expand on the next question. It's really, has your school adopted an instructional model? And if so, which model? But I think the other thing is maybe a little bit about how you adopted the one you did, because you might not have just taken one lock stock. And I think, Mitch, you had an interesting experience and some insights into that. And so any of you that haven't been in on this, got your voice in there, make sure you tell us about that. What's your instructional model, and how'd you maybe come about it?
Well, I'll just start off real quick. Ours started here a few years back, and it was we looked at a couple of different instructional models and some frameworks, but we took the approach that we created our own set of principles of learnings. And really, it was a simple process, but it was, I think, a beneficial process, and our staff was able to sit down and just define what they felt good instruction was, what it looked like, what it sounded like. And it really was interesting because after taking what the teachers felt as though all those components and all those criteria for good instruction, I took all that information and went back and compared it to some of the known frameworks out there, like Marzano. The Danielson model, Fink has some work, but as I looked at what our teachers said and what those models had in them, it was very much the same. And so I think staff, do a pretty good job, and teachers know what good instruction is. But I think the benefit of getting a common framework for everybody is that, once again, back to that dialogue, because you know, teachers call certain things different things in classrooms, and once you get that to be similar, then those conversations, I think, go to the next level.
We've adopted Marzano because the ESU 6 told us to adopt Marzano. No, just teasing. Actually, they offered training, and our high school group of teachers were the first ones to go through the training, and our high school principal came back and said, this is something that you're just going to love, Kroll, because I know how you are with this kind of stuff, and this is going to be something that you're going to really like. And he was real excited about it when he came, so I was really looking forward to having the elementary go through. And so we basically adopted the Marzano model because it was the training that was available, but also I feel really good about that as a model. And but I just think any model that you adopt, as long as it's something that works for your school, and Mitch, you guys went through a lot of work. I mean, you know, you've went through the appropriate steps to really authenticate it to your needs, and so I think that's really cool that you guys kind of have come up with kind of your own model based on the needs of your teachers. So.
We'll welcome TJ Meyer to the program as well. Hi, TJ. Welcome home.
What's that?
Welcome home.
Thank you very much.
What the question was, TJ, is what model have you adopted, and kind of what was your process that you went through that?
Okay, has Brandon answered that for the Milford Public Schools or not?
I've not spoken a word yet, so I'm going to give it to you, and it's yours because you were the one that started it.
Congratulations. We use the Marzano model, and actually it kind of started off, we started doing a book study a few years ago and kind of just try to introduce our staff to kind of some of his strategies and instructional tools. And then the ESU 6 played a huge part in helping us implement that. We were part of the Marzano. Toby, what did you call that? The research lab?
Yeah, we had an academy.
Right, we were part of that. So we took the last 2 years. We were part of that. So at the high school and the elementary, we took a total of 10 teachers each of the last 2 years, and kind of used those staff to help us implement it with the rest of our staff in our buildings.
Brandon could not have said it better himself, TJ.
Brandon, you have anything to add to that?
I have to unmute myself first. No, I think you hit it right on. I think it's just a process that's taken quite a bit of time, and it's a process.
One thing that I would chime in at Jill Johnson at Mrs. Jill J on Twitter just sent out a picture with comparing different models: the Nebraska model, the ESU model, Danielson model, Marzano model, which, you know, for someone like me who's not as knowledgeable about this, I thought was a really interesting graphic. If you're on Twitter, you can check that out. I just retweeted it from my account too. So
That is nice. Way to go, Jill.
Yeah, she's all right.
Who hired her?
Well, somebody in this room hired her first, so I got to give them.
Where did she come from? Twice.
That's right. Hey, let's move on to question 4 then, if that's all right, because this hits at just what what Jill just tweeted is what do you need your model to include? Because I look at it as kind of the Goldilocks syndrome. You know, what's too big, you know, and what's too small, and what seems to fit different areas. So what kinds of things should a model include? And you can talk about the model that you have, but what kinds of things should they have there?
I feel like I'm always starting, so I'm letting somebody else start. Or not.
I guess the thing that I like about the Marzano model is how it's broken down into different lesson segments, things that involve routine events, things enacted on the spot, things addressing content. It makes it easier. You know, what we told our staff was pick 1 or 2 things that you would like to improve upon, and I felt like it was important from the get-go to not overwhelm them, you know, and throw too much at them too soon. Let them customize, so to speak, what it is that they wanted to improve. And so the way that the model's broken down, I think was very beneficial for us.
You know, just to go off of what Colin was saying there, I would agree with that, and I would also say I think I like, you know, the different levels that are in the Marzano, the reflection guide, and you know, you can look at a broad category such as engagement, but which is kind of nice to be able to look at all the broad categories together, so you can kind of see teaching as kind of everything that it kind of involves, but also you have to have enough small elements as well, because let's say as one of your growth plans you want to talk about engagement, but you have to have enough information within that that tool to give you some direction. So like in the Marzano, under engagement, there's things like physical movement or competition or academic games or using intriguing information. So there's enough information there to kind of guide that process. So you're not, you can get a little more specific than saying, well, I want to be a more engaging teacher. You can also have some specific examples within that model.
And I'll piggyback right off that with what both of you guys are saying, because that's coming out on the chat as well. Marla and Courtney both said, you know, flexibility. Marla went on consistency yet flexibility, and Holly mentioned, you know, end result is what's best for kids, which, you know, dives right into that flexibility piece that you guys mentioned too, and the pieces that you can pull from it.
And I guess I kind of like under each design question under Marzano how they have the evidences for what it would look like as far as teacher evidence and also student evidence. So it's kind of really practical and can be applied to a lot of different situations. So I think that's been a good tool for us as well.
Well, and kind of to piggyback off of what Mitch was saying about the smaller, elements and things, the teachers, their first priority is instruction. And so that's kind of where we started. We started looking at Marzano's 41 elements of instruction and started to kind of break those down into chunks that we could handle. And so I actually put all those elements on a Google form, and the teachers kind of looked at it and decided from those 41 elements which 6 elements would they like to focus on for that first semester. And so we implemented 6 of Marzano's instructional elements that first semester. And then I created walkthroughs based on those 6 elements, but still talking about the breakdowns that Colin was talking about. So we kind of looked at the big picture and started to narrow it down from the instructional side of things, and the teachers chose those things like routines, which is very important at the beginning of the school year, and chunking content into digestible bites, and noticing when students aren't engaged, and celebrating success. And so those kind of were the 6 elements that we started with. I put them on a Google Calendar, and then every 3 weeks we scaffolded onto that next we went on to that next element. But then now, as I'm going through and I'm doing my walkthroughs, I'm not just looking for one instructional strategy, I'm looking for 2. And so we're kind of started by hitting the instructional piece and by looking at those 41 instructional elements and then breaking those down into smaller chunks. So we've already kind of I've sent that Google form out again. So now we have a new 6 that we're going to be working on this fall that their teachers voted on, and so that gives them that teacher buy-in, and they know right away as I'm walking through their classrooms what I'm looking for. So that's kind of where we started.
So let's talk about that a little bit in the next question. Question 5 on the chat is, and I worded this such that try to give an example of something from your model, an element that has worked particularly well for you, because I do think that it helps to have it down to the grain size of what maybe it means in an elementary class, what it means in a social studies class. I'm a recovering social studies teacher, so is there some element that you have attached onto that you thought, that really worked well and that had some broad use for us in our school?
I'll start this time since I haven't really spoke tonight. I think one thing that we did was at the beginning of the year we set our yearly staff goals based upon one of the 41 teacher reflective pieces, which may have been too broad, which we'll go back and evaluate after this year. But as each teacher picked one of those, that was a good place to go to when we were talking about formal evaluations or even walkthroughs as to what you saw in their classroom. And so we created a Google form, as many of these other people did as well. They put their goal for the year in there, and so that way when I walked into a classroom, I could see what they were trying to focus on that year. Did I see it or didn't I see it? And then also with the help of Toby did a monthly staff in service on a variety of these topics, and we tried to hit a lot of those that teachers had picked for the year.
I'll throw one out here. I've been in some schools, and it seems, and I've worked in secondary. My background's a little more secondary, but I found that just the simple notion of it's how you engage students, but how you manage response rates. How do you make sure every kid in the classroom is somehow responsible for the information and the questions being asked? I think that one has a lot of leverage across a lot of areas, and I think it's you might do it differently in an elementary classroom as you do in a high school English class, but still at the same time I think that has some universal things. Is great question, and Mitch, you're a good one about driving conversation through questions. Ask a teacher, how do you do that? If that's part of your instructional model, is how do you manage response rate? So I think that's another good example. I'd like to hear more from you guys. So.
Yeah, I was just jotting a couple of things down here, and I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago. One of our principles of learning was monitoring progress, and so as we talked a little bit ago about what is the benefits of having an instructional model. Well, Laura, you mentioned it creates a focus for when you're in classrooms, and so as we were conducting walkthroughs, one of those things we were focusing on was monitoring the progress of students, and then we got into the notion of feedback. Teachers giving feedback to students, but also receiving feedback from students, and it got us. Just looking at that element, it led us into a book study. Jane Pollock wrote a book called The Hinge that ties teaching and learning, and so we really we all had an opportunity, I think, to learn together about how to get feedback from students in the classroom, and so that's just a simple example of what I think an element from a set of principles of learning or an instructional model, that's what it can do for you. It starts those conversations that can eventually lead to professional development opportunities.
Absolutely.
So let's play on that just a little bit. Then that notion of an element like that, if a high school social studies teacher was watching a second grade classroom, they might get ideas based on that element. You want to comment on that, Mitch, on how that could universally help both teachers?
Well, yeah, I think it's, once again, like everybody has mentioned, that common language of instruction, or the focus that you have when you go into a classroom, and if you implement, in the issue 6 areas, as credit to the issue 6 staff, we've implemented some instructional rounds in school districts around the area, and I think other people call it peer evaluations or peer observations, but the idea that teachers are getting into other teachers' classrooms and just observing, and they have kind of a roadmap to look or a set of criteria to look for when they're in a classroom. And your example of a high school classroom or a high school teacher going down to the elementary, they can still pick up things like maybe an instructional routine or an engagement strategy or something. So I think if your instructional model has some of those broad enough topics, I think it doesn't really, it doesn't always matter the grade level or even the subject matter. I think it provides that avenue for teachers to learn from one another.
And I know that we've had, go ahead, Brandon, or whoever.
Right.
I'll just jump in. We did our first instructional rounds last week, and we also did some video reflection. All staff did their own video reflection first semester, and just that independent piece of teachers being able to comment. And Toby helped me set up a blog where teachers could comment on their reflection, and then we followed up with our instructional rounds this week. And just to piggyback on kind of what Mitch said, but just getting other teachers in other classrooms creates a whole new opportunity in my mind. And it, again, going back to my point earlier about collaboration, it just invites that, and it's neat to see teachers being excited about having the opportunity to get in other teachers' classrooms. So I think those reflective pieces and that collaboration piece is still a huge part of what we've seen early on in our implementation.
Our elementary is actually split between two sites. We have part of our elementary at Milligan and part of our elementary at Exeter, so it's a little bit difficult to do instructional rounds. What makes it even harder is that our veteran teachers are at one site and our newbie teachers are at the other site, and so we've done some videotaping. Basically, at this point, the videotaping is just for teachers to reflect on their own teaching. They haven't really shared the videotapes with any other teachers, although I have asked if they would be interested in doing something like that, and they definitely are interested in that. But it's for me, it's tough being at two different sites because I can go into one classroom and see teachers doing something particularly well that I know that another teacher knows that they're weak in, and I want to be able to send those teachers into those classrooms and see how that classroom management is working and things. And so one thing that we've been doing is using a lot of Google Hangouts, but also we've created a Google community that at least the teachers are able to share those instructional elements and strategies and things that they're doing in the way of the implementation of the instructional model, and what's working and what's not working. And so we have really done a lot of collaborating through a Google community, which isn't nearly the same as being able to go in to somebody's classroom and watch it firsthand, but it has been something that has worked at this point, and next year, if we are not all at the same site, I'm thinking that it would be well worth the cost of a sub to be able to have those teachers go into other teachers' classrooms, just like what you're talking about. So that's probably the direction that we'll be heading next year.
I want to follow up with that really quick because Peg Coover brought up, how important it is that, like you guys mentioned, getting teachers in other classrooms, and Holly mentioned cross-curricular. When you guys have those teachers do the watch, either whether it's watching the video or visiting classrooms, do you do cross-curricular, or do you do like grade level, like subject area, or what do you recommend, I guess?
We do whatever's available schedule-wise. It doesn't really matter content-wise. Like Mitch said it earlier, good teaching is good teaching. So what's happening in a science classroom that's good teaching is probably going to be good teaching in the business classroom. One thing we haven't done yet that Mr. Meyer and myself have talked about for a year and a half now is having the elementary staff come to the high school and the high school staff go to the elementary school, because I think there's some things that they do that our staff could really benefit from with their reading program and their math program on some of the stuff they do there. So good teaching is good teaching, and so if we can pick up any tips, that's beneficial to every teacher.
I guess
Colin, I'd like you to weigh in on what you guys did.
Say that again, Toby.
Colin, what he weigh in on how they did it, because I think you did cross-curricular.
And I would say that's a big benefit. We're fortunate enough to be in a K-12 building. We share a lot of staff, a lot of our middle school staff teach some upper elementary and or some lower level high school as well. But when we've been doing our rounds and you listen to some of the discussions at some of our PD then where people are talking about how it went and stuff, it's pretty amazing the stuff that your high school shop teacher picks up from the 4th grade classroom as far as routines and things like that. Same thing with some of our elementary teachers going into the high school PE class and just some of the things he does as far as cueing the next activity and things like that. They're things you can take away no matter what the age group or content level. I think it's been a great benefit to us to be able to have our staffs intermingle, so to speak.
I think both groups have a lot to offer each other, because I think sometimes when you go into a high school classroom, they have whatever 50 or 60-minute periods or whatever it is, and so they feel like they have a lot of instruction that they need to get in a short amount of time, and so sometimes I think that you do kind of forget, that stopping and chunking your content and checking for understanding and making sure kids are engaged, because they have such a short amount of time to get the things in that they want to get in during that period. And with elementary teachers having their kiddos, all day long, they're constantly doing that share with your partner or think, pair, share, and all those different strategies to check for understanding. So I think as you go, start to have high school teachers watch elementary teachers and elementary watch high school teachers, you'd kind of develop that respect for what each grade level does in the way of instruction. So
let's go on then and talk about, as most of you folks have got this going in your districts or your schools to some degree, and some have done more than others, but still I think there's something to be learned from your experiences. So Here's just kind of a zinger question. What advice would you give to anybody that's going to implement an instructional model? Anything at all, I think, is helpful because let's learn from each other.
I think the advice that I would give somebody right off the top would be start small, and don't try to. And it's so easy to be overwhelmed. I mean, because especially when you're looking at the Marzano model, and you know there's 41 instructional strategies and 9 design questions and 3 lesson segments, and so it's really easy for teachers to become overwhelmed, and so make the teachers part of that decision-making process when you're talking about going through classrooms, and let them be a part of deciding what is it that what does good instruction look like, and what is it that you're looking for when you come into my classroom, and have those conversations up front and make those decisions together, and start small.
I think I'd add to Laura. To me, the biggest thing, it just seems so overwhelming to me at Milford. Like, how am I going to implement all these 41 different questions and strategies? So basically, I asked Toby to come in. So we broke it down by lesson segments, and so we tried to chunk it. So Toby came in and presented like a half-hour staff meeting about lesson segment 1. And then we have team meetings by grade level at the elementary. So then I asked the team to select one design question or one strategy as their goal for the next 4 weeks, and so they would implement that goal. Then each week they'd have discussions. Okay, how'd that go this week? And we tried to implement this goal. What could we do different to tweak it? So we did that about 4 to 6 weeks, and then Toby came back in and just kind of did a quick overview on lesson segment 2, and then I asked that team of teachers again. Okay, now select a goal from that lesson segment 2 that you can implement. So then they did the same thing, worked on it for 4 to 6 weeks, had discussions each week as far as how was it going, and then Toby came back in and did lesson segment 3. It seemed to chunk it a little bit because, again, to me initially it just seemed so overwhelming as far as how am I going to implement this with my staff, especially since we had 10 of our teachers go through the training and 10 of them, or 10 to 15, that did not. So I just had to figure out how am I going to get the rest of the teachers on board. So I thought if we chunked it, but then also had those collaborative discussions amongst teams, that would maybe help as far as implementing it to the entire staff.
That's nice, TJ. That's awesome.
No, I would agree with TJ, and I think basically the 2 kind of themes I think of, and Laura mentioned it too, is start small. Start with maybe one element of your model or your framework. And then the other thing that I think is important is, like TJ had mentioned, is time for teachers to kind of visit with one another or collaborate and just talking about specific examples from their classroom. And that, once again, that goes back to the benefit of having a model, is you're driving that collaboration among staff.
Yeah, I think it's already been said, but the patience and time and working together with your staff to make it happen. We've been talking common language and all of this for probably 6 years, TJ. Am I correct on that?
Right.
At Milford?
Right.
And you know, I have a million places I want to go with this, but it just takes time and it takes buy-in from your staff and making sure everybody's on the same page. And so it is a slow but very worthwhile process. I feel as if we're in a good place at Milford, but there's still a lot of room for us to grow, which is the exciting part. And so we'll just keep plugging away and implementing, and like everybody said, breaking down the teacher reflective guide, breaking down good practices. So time and patience are my advice.
And I guess I would add to that, I think as we are trying to struggle as about how we're going to implement this at Milford, I know that I've had valuable conversations with Laura and then the folks at Dorchester. So I think just bouncing ideas off each other as administrators, especially if you can tap into folks that are maybe a step ahead of you, I think it was extremely helpful to us at Milford as we try to implement this philosophy at Milford.
Yeah, definitely called Mitch and Laura and Toby.
Well, I do think there's a lot to be said for what you guys, the process you use, because, you know, if you try to do everything at once, like I said before, it's like trying to drink out of a fire hose. You just can't get it all so it makes any sense, but just starting with things that teachers already do and putting it in the model and saying, listen, you know, you're already doing routines or you're already engaging students. What are some new ways to do it? I think you've been very smart about how you've done that.
Well, I
So,
think what it ends up being is a systematic way of organizing what teachers already do. You know, teachers already do a lot of these things. It just actually puts it in a common language, and it puts it into a system so that everybody is on the same page. And I think if something doesn't work, it's okay. Just that didn't work. How we decided to implement that is not going to work. So let's try something different, because I know Milford, they kind of let teachers decide on their own what instruction or what elements they wanted to incorporate, where at EM we just kind of decided as a group and everybody's kind of working on the same ones. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but if it doesn't work, scrap it and try something else, because there's not a right or wrong way.
One thing that I would say that you guys, a lot of what I see on Twitter is kind of some of the same things about starting slow and the breaking it up. And one thing that Matt Maltzberger from York mentioned was having those instructional rounds include the constructive criticism. And I know as a teacher that was never one of my strong suits, is accepting that. But it's huge and extremely important if you're going to improve, to get some of that feedback.
excellent. Well, let's go on to the next question then. How should you train on this when you get started? So you work through that. You have to get that initial training. What kinds of things should you keep in mind when you're training your model, and maybe how you guys did it?
Well, Toby, I
Go
would,
ahead.
first of all, you know, ESU 6 and actually some of the other area ESUs providing the training in the area was a big benefit for us getting off the ground. But I'd say the second thing, smartest thing that we ever did, we started last year in year 2. We started setting aside some time, and at Centennial, we started doing late starts last year. I think we maybe had 4 or 5 late starts that were kind of devoted to the implementation of Marzano. This year, we had 1 late start every month, and the majority of those were devoted to continuing down this road. I think that it's big. You know, I think Toby always says it's not the shiny thing that's out there. Your staff knows that you're committed to it and you're going to keep coming back to it and continue to work at it. And so, as big and monumental as all this is, as you guys were saying on question 5, you know, you got to chunk it, and so forth. That's kind of what we've done. That's been effective for us.
Yeah, I would also say you said I think it goes back to just good PD too. Is you don't want to have an event and then say, okay, now go, but at the same time, you know, you want to come back to it. And let's talk a little bit, maybe Brandon and TJ, your experience with doing just a little bit and then having the teachers play with it or work on it a little bit, reinforce how you guys did that, because I think that was a key in how you kind of let this thing unfold.
Brandon? Okay, I guess.
Or not.
Yeah, like I said, I think the big reason that we went that approach was just it was so overwhelming, and to me, and I remember when I was at the high school 2 years ago, I went in and said, okay, Shelley Mowinkle, I'm going to evaluate you using this Marzano stuff, and I'm like, I got about 10 minutes into it. Okay, scratch that. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. So we just had to find a way that we could implement it with our staff, and so that it'd be useful and practical, And so I think that just made sense to us to break it down into segments and to chunk it as I talk. And I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but and again, the key piece of that, I think, is that, as I said at the elementary, I require them to have weekly team meetings, so it just allowed that collaboration. So it just wasn't one teacher out there trying to implement this strategy, but they'd come back each week and talk about things that went well and things that didn't go so well. And then I've created a Google Doc where they share notes from their discussion, and then I go back and read those each week. So it's kind of neat to see the things that they've tried to implement in their classroom and just how they've worked together to improve. And I think the whole reason for this is teacher growth, and I think I've seen some evidence as a result of that collaboration with each other as teachers.
Yeah, Brandon Tim, I believe, asked me the question of what do you do with the, how do you not push too hard with different staff members? And TJ kind of alluded to it. Everybody's going to be at a different place, but when you have that instructional model in place, at least you're talking the same language with your staff, even though you may have the one teacher that's flying with a certain instructional model, they may be struggling with a different one, and so that's their goal for the year, and so you try to provide them as much feedback and support in that area, whereas they may have rules and procedures down pat and how they grab kids' attention. So I think it is a little bit on the individual teacher basis too, as to their growth and their process. So you look at your staff as a whole and what they may need, but you also work individually with those teachers as to what would take them to the next level as a teacher as well.
Toby, would you have anything?
Go ahead, Brandon.
Toby, would you have anything to add to that, since you've worked with both the high school and the elementary staff at Milford? What have you seen as you presented and kind of worked with our staffs?
Well, I think one of the key points on that has been that the way that we set it up, or you help set it up, where you do a little bit and then you try it in your classroom, and then you have that time for reflection, which is, if it's all right with everybody, I'm going to move to that question next about teacher reflection and goal setting. Because Josh, I think those would be some areas that would be some good areas for people to delve into in the time we have left. But to say this is what I tried, and as Laura said, what worked, what didn't work, because then they start to own it and they start to understand this is how I use the model, you know. And yeah, you're right, Laura. Sometimes stuff doesn't work, but that's okay, you know. You're trying something new. So I've seen it be really beneficial to come back to it then and say this is what I tried and this is how it worked. So let's go to that question next then, and that's the one that's on the chat right now. How has teacher reflection or goal setting been part of your instructional model? How do you use that? Because that's the next step and the next level beyond just understanding the model.
You know, I think that's a really important piece. And I'll go back to one of the first points that was made is about having an instructional framework for observers. It provides a focus when you're in the classroom, but it also provides a focus when educators, as we self-reflect on things that we think we can get better at. And you know, before I had a model to look at, I didn't have as many I guess things to think about. When I looked at the Marzano self-reflection guide, gosh, there were a lot of things in there that I never really even thought, you know, in great detail about. And so I know we've talked with, you know, first-year teachers too. They really actually kind of liked the great detail within that self-reflection guide, and we really kind of wondered, because it's a pretty large document and didn't want people to feel overwhelmed. But we really had some staff members that came in and said they really liked it, because I'll go back to my engagement example. They said, you know, I'm really looking for ways to be, you know, an engaging teacher, and it really gave me some extra things to think about, like how can I get kids moving around in the classroom, or what kind of competition, inconsequential competition types of things can I do in my classroom. And so it really was, once again, it provided that opportunity for them to really think about their own craft and things that they had thought about, and you know, helping them define what their next step is in improving their own craft.
Well, I think, and I know Catlet's listening to this because he's tweeting some things out, so he's going to be happy that I'm going to mention Google Communities again. But like I said, the elementary has a Google community, and so I think one of the ways that I've been trying to get teachers to do some inadvertent self-reflecting without even really realizing they're doing self-reflecting is putting some challenges on to the Google community for teachers to do that gets them kind of thinking about, so what do I do? So, it can even be something that involves then the instructional element itself. What do you do? What are some strategies that you use when you are noticing that students are not engaged? And that might be a question that I pose to the teachers on the Google community. And what's nice about the Google community is that they can answer that question, and all of that dialogue will stay together underneath that question. And so then as teachers start to answer that question, they start to get ideas from each other, but they're also doing some self-reflecting, thinking, so what do I do when I notice that kids aren't engaged? What is a strategy that I use to make sure that I get them engaged? And so they'll answer those questions in that Google community, and it just really gets them to think, and it gets them to share their thoughts, and then it also gets other teachers to start using those strategies if that might be an area of weakness for them.
I just have to echo, I can't overstate how absolutely cool it is, Laura, when you gave those challenges, and we've done similar things where it's just a challenge. It's not an assignment. It's not something that everybody has to do necessarily, but it's a challenge. So try something along the lines of physical movement in your classroom, and then talk to me about how it went. I just love that idea of a challenge, because I just think that makes it less intimidating and more collaborative.
Well, and I think it poses a challenge to me too, because then I start digging for information for them so that they can start to use different strategies to get kids engaged. So I found this really cool article about call and response, and it talked about 50 ways or 50 different call and response terms that teachers can use to make sure kids are engaged. And so I put that out on the Google community, and the challenge was to use one of those call and response techniques during your class time when you notice that kids are not engaged. And so an example might be when teachers notice that the kids are not engaged, one of the call and responses, the teacher will call out and the kids will respond. So the teacher calls out macaroni and cheese, and the students respond, yes, please. And then all of a sudden they're all engaged because teachers were noticing that kids were not engaged, and so they do this call out, and then the kids respond. And so it also challenges me as a principal, and to me an instructional type manager, to help teachers with those areas that I'm challenging them to be better at. I then need to be challenged to find ways to help them be better at that.
I'm just thankful that Laura agreed to share all those challenges with us so that we can steal her material.
Yes, that's excellent. Okay, we have about 7 minutes left, so I think we'll go to one more question, and it will be how you might incorporate technology into your instructional model. And I know you've talked about some things, and please reiterate some things, how you've used maybe Google Communities or Google Hangouts, but also it's this other question about if a teacher is using some kind of technology in their classroom with their kids, how that might be attached to their instructional model as maybe a way, Laura, to use technology to manage response rates, for example, or how we could use technology to help kids preview material, or whatever's in your instructional model. So let's just brainstorm a little bit. How might that happen?
I know that one of the elements that we've been working on is noticing when students are not engaged, or celebrating success. And so we're one-to-one with iPads, and so the teachers have been awesome about implementing different apps that go with different instructional elements. And so celebrating success, for example, is one of the Marzano instructional elements. And so Class Dojo has become an app that most teachers, if not all teachers, use to pat kids on the back, so to speak, or what happens is all the kids are an avatar, and there's certain behaviors that you're looking for, and so teachers will give them points for those behaviors, and it's a way of actually patting the kids on the back or celebrating their successes. and that's just one example of an app that I know most of the teachers at EM use. And then there might be another and then there's some other apps that I know that they use to share with one another, and Evernote, as you know, is something that I am very passionate about. We couldn't get through this hangout without me mentioning Evernote, but a lot of the teachers are using Evernote for student portfolios as well.
I think when it comes to technology, you know, you got so many options and so many different things you can do. I think the model gives you so much more direction on why you need to use technology, or if a teacher is wanting to implement technology, there's so much more of a focus as to here's how it's going to be used and here's why it can be tied back to a goal, instead of, you know, technology kind of going 100 different ways in your building. The instruction model gives you that focus and allows you to you know, really force teachers to say, you know, I've even had requests this year for Apple TV or using an iPad for something, but just for them to be able to bring it to me in a way of saying, hey, this is what I've been trying to do, this is how this will enable me to do that. I just like it, and we're just again in the infancy stages, but just that focus for technology with a purpose, I think, is really, it forces you to be more efficient.
Well, and I think to piggyback on what Ryan is saying, the instructional model has really helped teachers to understand that technology is not in addition to what they already do, but an enhancement of what they already do. So, you know, they already pat kids on the back and give positive praise, but now they, like the example that I gave with Class Dojo, now they actually have a visual for students to see how they're earning points and how they're being praised. And so they've already given praise, but now they're using technology to display that praise.
Well, we have about 3 minutes left according to the ticker I see over here, so I'm going to open it up for any last words or last comments about anything that you think might help people as we talk about this topic of having an instructional model. We're just kind of getting into this across the state, so anything you have to share, just maybe one tip or one idea in the few minutes we have left.
I just want to mention I like Brandon's beard.
I just wanted to see what it was like to be at J_Allen for like 2 minutes. That's all I wanted. It would take me 10 years to grow a beard like that, Josh.
All right.
Last words, Laura, you're up.
Oh, I guess I would say I guess I would go back to start simple. I mean, if you haven't, and like Ryan's saying, he's in the infancy stages of starting, but like Brandon's saying, it takes years to get where you want to be, and even then, you're never really where you want to be because there's always things changing and there's always that growth. So I think you can, wherever you're at, start small and just keep plucking away.
Yep.
And I guess I would say, sorry, Brandon, you want to go ahead?
Nope, you're up.
I would say, you know, we've talked a lot about collaboration as teachers, but again, I would say the key as administrators is to collaborate with each other, because I can remember sitting at an ESU meeting with Laura and Dwayne from Dorchester and just hearing about where they're at, and then I just had to pick their brains and just try to figure this out as far as how am I going to get my staff on board with this, and how am I going to implement this with my staff. So the key is with administration as well is just to collaborate with each other and just learn from each other, and so I guess that would be my, I know I said that before, but that would be my closing remarks again.
Absolutely.
You know,
Well, I think we're out of time. Appreciate everybody's efforts here. Josh, any last words from you?
The only thing that I'll say is that either later tonight or tomorrow, once it gets posted on YouTube, I'll put it out on Twitter, and I will put it on the NEB Ed Chat wiki space as well. So if you want to send the recording to someone else, if you just like to hear Laura talk some more, you can just replay it over and over again so that, you know, you make your day better. I would also mention next week's chat is we're going to do a NETA reflection from the NETA conference last week. So if you have comments, suggestions, we will. That's the topic for next week at 8 p.m. Central Time.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody. This was great.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for participating.